People often ask me, Dr. Peterson, how do I let go of someone I love? Or how do I stop feeling so emotionally overwhelmed by things I can't control? And I always say, well, you don't just let go. You transform the relationship you have with your own dependency. Emotional detachment isn't about becoming cold or numb. No, it's about reclaiming responsibility for your own inner stability. So let me break this down into 4 fundamental psychological principles. When people say they're emotionally attached, they often don't even understand what they're truly attached to. And that's where the real danger begins. Not in the emotion itself, but in the misidentification of its source. You see, we walk around with this assumption that our feelings are always aligned with truth, that they're reliable indicators of what's valuable or real. But that's not true, not even close. In fact, our emotions can be deeply misleading, not because they lie, but because they're responding to interpretations, not reality. So when someone says, I can't let go, my response is often, let go of what exactly? It's rarely the person. It's the idea of the person, the image, the role they played, the comfort they brought. It's the story you told yourself about what they meant to your life, the story in which they were the missing piece, the redemptive force, the answer to your chaos. And now that they're gone, or different, or unavailable, you feel like something inside you is collapsed. Of course you do. Because a piece of your internal structure wasn't built by you. It was outsourced to them. Let me explain. In psychological terms, we project parts of ourselves onto others. Carl Jung wrote about this extensively. We cast our unlived potential, our suppressed traits, our unmet needs, all of it onto another person. And then we fall in love with that projection. That's not love. That's spiritual and emotional dependency masquerading as romance or loyalty or commitment. You've latched onto someone as if they're oxygen, not because of who they are, but because of what they symbolize. And symbolism is powerful. You weren't attached to their presence. You were attached to what their presence meant to you. This is why detachment is so agonizing. It's not just about losing a relationship. It's about losing the part of yourself you located in them. That's what people miss. They think heartbreak is just grief, but it's not just that. It's identity fragmentation. You borrowed stability from someone else, and now that they're gone, your psyche doesn't know how to stand on its own. That's not love. That's an unconscious transaction. I'll give you my affection if you give me a sense of wholeness. But here's the thing. People can't carry that burden for long. Sooner or later, they drop it. And when they do, you have to confront the uncomfortable truth. You were never really in a relationship with them. You were in a relationship with what they represented. Safety, purpose, validation, a future, a fantasy. So the question becomes, what exactly are you grieving? Are you grieving the loss of intimacy or the loss of identity? Are you sad because you lost a connection or because you lost the illusion of certainty? People say things like, they made me feel alive, or I don't know who I am without them. That's the problem. You outsourced your vitality to another person, and now you're suffering the consequence of that dependency. That's not a spiritual wound. That's an architectural flaw in your emotional design. You have to be brave enough to dissect your attachment, to dig deep into the structure of your psyche and ask, what part of myself did I place in their hands? That's where the real work begins. That's where transformation starts. You peel back the layers, memory, emotion, identity, and you realize, I wasn't just attached to the person. I was attached to the escape they offered me from myself. Think about that. If your connection to someone is rooted in escape from loneliness, fear, uncertainty, then what you're really avoiding is yourself. And any attachment born from self-avoidance will eventually become suffering, because no one can permanently save you from your own unresolved chaos. They might soothe it for a while, but they can't solve it. That's your responsibility. So if you want to detach emotionally, start by interrogating your own projections. Ask, what did I see in them that I'm missing in myself? Was it confidence, safety, hope? Now ask the harder question. Why am I not building those qualities internally? Why did I hand that responsibility to someone else? Why did I believe that salvation would come from the outside? Because here's the truth, and it's a brutal one. You can't build a durable identity on borrowed pieces. You can't expect others to carry the weight of your unhealed parts. That's not love. That's avoidance in disguise. And the longer you stay emotionally attached to a person based on illusion, the longer you delay your own integration. So define what you're actually attached to, not at the surface level, but at the symbolic level. What are they a metaphor for in your life? What unresolved pain are they covering? What unmet need are they feeding? Once you know that, once you stare it down with courage and honesty, you begin the real process of detachment. Not by erasing emotion, but by reclaiming authorship over your own internal world. That's the first step toward true freedom. Not escape from emotion, but liberation from delusion. The path to emotional detachment doesn't lie in avoidance. It lies in the willing confrontation of the very thing you're afraid to face. Chaos. Emotional chaos. Psychological chaos. The chaos of uncertainty, abandonment, rejection, failure. The stuff that wakes you up at night and whispers, you're not enough, you're not safe, you're alone. That's the monster under the bed, and the only way to overcome it is to look directly at it. Not run from it, not distract yourself from it, but face it. Voluntarily, with open eyes and a steady heart. This isn't just poetic metaphor, it's psychological truth. If you don't face the chaos voluntarily, it will come find you, and when it does, it will hit you harder and with less mercy than if you had chosen to meet it on your own terms. That's the principle embedded in countless myths and religious narratives. The hero doesn't wait for the dragon to burn down his village. He goes out to confront the dragon. That's the archetype. That's the blueprint of transformation. And you ignore it at your peril. In practical terms, what does that mean? It means you have to sit with the discomfort. You have to let yourself feel the anxiety, the loss, the betrayal, the confusion, all of it, without trying to numb it, suppress it, or distract yourself with entertainment, food, sex, or fantasy. You have to allow the storm to pass through you, because the emotions you're avoiding aren't going anywhere. They're just gathering strength in the shadows of your subconscious, and eventually they'll erupt, often in ways you can't predict or control. So the question isn't whether you'll face chaos. You will. The only question is how. Will you walk into the storm like a warrior, or will you wait until it consumes you? There's no neutral option. Avoidance is not neutrality. It's delay. And delayed confrontation makes the monster grow. Now, let's be clear. Confronting chaos doesn't mean indulging in emotional drama or wallowing in pain. That's not courage, that's masochism. Real confrontation is disciplined. It's structured. It's about staring into the emotional abyss with the intent to understand, not to drown. It's about making the unconscious conscious. When you feel a surge of grief, or anger, or fear, don't just react. Don't suppress it either. Get curious. Ask, where is this coming from? What is this emotion trying to tell me? What part of myself is speaking right now? This is the foundation of emotional sovereignty, the ability to observe your internal world without being enslaved by it. And you can't develop that capacity unless you train yourself to endure discomfort. That's what confrontation does. It forges resilience. It transforms raw, chaotic emotion into integrated understanding. Now, people will often say, but it's too painful. I can't handle it. And I would say, you don't know what you can handle until you try. You're stronger than you think. Your nervous system is built for adaptation. Your psyche is built for growth. But growth only happens when you push against the edge of your known territory. That's why voluntary confrontation is so powerful. It sends a signal to your brain that you're in control, that you're not a victim of your emotions, you're a participant in your evolution. That's a fundamental shift in identity. Because up until that point, you've probably been living reactively, waiting for life to make you feel better, for someone else to apologize, for time to heal the wound. But time doesn't heal all wounds. Time just buries them if you're not intentional. What heals is voluntary courage. The willingness to say, I'll feel what I need to feel. I'll process what I need to process. And I won't wait for someone else to save me. You might think, what if I confront the chaos and it breaks me? That's a valid fear. But here's the truth. Not confronting it is what will break you. You don't become whole by avoiding fragmentation. You become whole by moving through it and reassembling yourself on the other side. That's the essence of psychological integration. To go into the dark forest of your own pain and emerge with the gold of wisdom and strength is also the essence of maturity. Because what does it mean to grow up, really? It means to take responsibility for your own suffering. It means to stop blaming your pain on others and to start seeing it as your pathway to growth. If someone hurt you, that's real. But the story you build around that pain, the meaning you attach to it, that's yours. That's the part you control. And to rewrite that story, you have to go back into the chaos consciously. This is why every spiritual tradition speaks of descent before resurrection. The descent into the underworld, the dark night of the soul, the belly of the whale. You go down willingly and you come back transformed. That's not just myth. That's neuropsychological reality. That's how your brain rewires. You face what you fear. So emotional detachment isn't about numbing. It's about strength. It's about walking through the fire of your own pain without flinching and coming out the other side, not hardened, but clarified. You begin to see what truly matters. You stop clinging to what's already gone. You stop trying to control what isn't yours. You stop being afraid of uncertainty because you've been there and you know you can survive it. Voluntary confrontation with chaos is the beginning of all inner transformation. It is the crossing of the threshold from passive suffering to active responsibility. It's the moment you stop running, turn around, and face the storm. Not because you're fearless, but because you've decided that fear no longer gets to dictate your life. And that decision is where freedom begins. One of the most fundamental reasons people struggle with emotional detachment is because their internal hierarchy of values is out of order. Values are not just vague notions or arbitrary preferences. They are the very architecture of your mind. They determine what you notice, what you prioritize, what you endure, and what you ultimately sacrifice your time and energy for. And when your hierarchy is misaligned, you build your emotional life on unstable ground. Most people put comfort, approval, or immediate emotional relief at the top of their hierarchy. They crave acceptance. They seek to avoid pain, and they chase pleasure. That might sound innocent, but it's disastrous if it governs your life. When comfort and approval become your highest goods, you start making choices that lead you deeper into dependency, not freedom. You become attached to things, people, or ideas that provide short-term relief, but long-term chaos. The problem isn't that you want comfort or love. The problem is that you treat these as the highest values. That's the fundamental mistake. Comfort is a tool, not a destination. Love is a reward, not a foundation. The highest value must be truth. Why? Because truth is the only thing that allows you to orient yourself properly in a chaotic world. Truth tells you what is real, what is possible, what is necessary. If you build your emotional life on anything less than truth, you're building it on illusion. And illusions are fragile. They crumble at the first sign of stress, loss, or challenge. They don't protect you. They betray you. So if you want to emotionally detach from dependency, you must reorder your hierarchy of values so that truth is at the top. But truth is often painful. Truth demands sacrifice. Truth forces you to confront your limitations, your faults, your failures. It tells you this relationship isn't healthy. This attachment isn't sustainable. You need to stand on your own. So truth is not comfortable. It's not easy, but it is necessary because it's the anchor that holds you steady when the emotional storm hits. Alongside truth, the next highest value must be responsibility. Responsibility for yourself, your choices, your emotions. Responsibility is the antidote to victimhood and dependency. When you accept responsibility, you reclaim your power. You say, I'm not a passive recipient of life's whims. I am the author of my own story. And with that comes the ability to detach emotionally, not by shutting down, but by choosing how you respond to the chaos within and without. That doesn't mean you become cold or unfeeling. It means you become discerning. You learn to say no to relationships or patterns that drain you because they contradict your values. You prioritize growth over immediate gratification. You understand that sometimes you must endure discomfort because it leads to a higher good. When truth and responsibility occupy the top rungs of your value hierarchy, everything else falls into place. Comfort, love, approval, they still have a place, but it's a lower place. They become rewards, byproducts of a life lived in alignment with truth and responsibility. You start to see love not as a crutch, but as a manifestation of two whole people choosing to engage with each other. You start to see comfort as a temporary state, not an entitlement. Reordering your values also means embracing meaning as a guiding principle. Meaning is what structures your life and provides direction through chaos. Viktor Frankl, the great psychologist, showed us that meaning is the antidote to suffering. When you anchor yourself in meaning, something bigger than immediate pleasure, you gain resilience. But meaning is not found in external things or other people. It's found in purposeful action, in the commitment to something worthy. That might be your work, your family, your creative endeavors, or your moral ideals. When you reorder your values around meaning, you learn to accept sacrifice and loss without losing yourself. This reordering requires brutal honesty with yourself. It demands that you face uncomfortable questions. What are you willing to suffer for? What illusions have you been clinging to because they felt good or safe? Are you prioritizing your emotional comfort over your integrity? Are you sacrificing your future well-being for momentary relief? Answering these questions is not easy. It often means dismantling familiar stories and illusions that have shaped your identity. But that dismantling is necessary if you want to build something stronger. You have to tear down the false gods of convenience and approval so you can build your inner temple on the solid rock of truth and responsibility. One practical way to reorder your values is through routine and discipline. Discipline is the physical manifestation of your hierarchy of values. When you discipline yourself to speak truthfully, to pursue your goals, to set boundaries, you're prioritizing truth and responsibility over fleeting feelings. Discipline teaches you to tolerate discomfort and to delay gratification. It rewires your brain to see long-term gain as more valuable than short-term relief. For discipline, you develop character. which is the foundation of emotional resilience. Character is the ability to stand firm when the winds of chaos blow. It's the structure that supports detachment because it allows you to act in accordance with your highest values, even when your emotions scream otherwise. Reordering your hierarchy of values is not a one-time event. It's a continual process. Life will always tempt you to slide back into old patterns of avoidance and dependency. But every time you reaffirm truth, responsibility, and meaning as your guiding stars, you build stronger psychological muscles. You become less vulnerable to emotional chaos because you're anchored in something deeper. Ultimately, to emotionally detach in a healthy way is to reorder your values so that what you pursue is no longer comfort or escape, but truth, responsibility, and meaning. And in doing so, you discover a freedom few ever attain, the freedom to feel deeply without being overwhelmed, to love fully without losing yourself, to face chaos without running. That is the mark of a mature, integrated human being. And that's the path out of emotional dependency and into genuine autonomy. To detach emotionally in a healthy and sustainable way, you must become someone who can stand on firm internal ground. That means developing a structured identity, not a vague, fluctuating collection of desires and reactions, but a coherent, articulated self, grounded in principles, purpose, and responsibility. And this isn't something you're born with. It's something you build, brick by brick, through conscious effort, voluntary discipline, and repeated confrontation with the unknown. Too many people define themselves passively. They absorb their identity from their environment, from their parents, their social circle, their romantic relationships, or worse, from the cultural noise of mass media. They mistake their preferences, emotions, or trauma for identity. But that's a fragile foundation. When your identity is dependent on external factors, it collapses the moment those factors are challenged, removed, or changed. This is why emotional attachment can become so consuming. If you don't know who you are independently of someone else, then the threat of losing that person becomes an existential crisis. You don't just fear being alone, you fear disintegration. It feels as if your entire sense of self is tied to their presence, their validation, or their perception of you. That's not love. That's dependency masquerading as connection. The antidote is identity, built from the inside out, not based on what others give you, but on what you commit to, on what you stand for, on what you embody consistently in thought and action. You decide, what kind of person do I want to become? What virtues matter most to me? Honesty, courage, discipline, compassion. What mission compels me? What suffering am I willing to endure for a higher good? These are not abstract philosophical questions. They're the blueprint for psychological stability. Identity must be tied to action. You don't become confident by thinking positive thoughts. You become confident by doing hard things. You become reliable by showing up when it's inconvenient. You become trustworthy by telling the truth even when it costs you. Every action is a vote for the kind of person you're becoming. And those votes accumulate. That's how character is formed, not in moments of inspiration, but in the grind of ordinary choices. The deeper your identity is rooted in responsibility, the less it is shaken by emotional chaos. You begin to orient yourself not around feelings, but around values. Not around other people's approval, but around your own integrity. That's what allows you to detach emotionally when needed, not by going numb, but by acting in accordance with your principles, even when your emotions pull you elsewhere. You become someone who is anchored, someone who does not drift with every emotional tide. But structure doesn't mean rigidity. A well-structured identity is adaptable, not brittle. You have to be open to feedback, willing to change when new evidence appears, humble enough to admit your flaws. But that openness must exist within a framework. Otherwise, you fall into chaos. Identity without structure is just confusion. Structure without flexibility is tyranny. The balance is found in strength combined with humility, in being principled but never arrogant. To build a structured identity, you need clarity. And clarity comes from writing, speaking, reflecting. Sit down and ask yourself, what are my highest aims? What do I believe about myself? Where do those beliefs come from? And are they true? What am I willing to take responsibility for today? This self-inquiry is not a luxury. It is a necessity for anyone seeking freedom from emotional enslavement. You also need routine. Discipline is not a punishment. It is the architecture of identity. Every time you follow a structured daily routine, you reinforce the idea that you are someone who takes life seriously. You're not at the mercy of your moods. You're not a slave to impulse. You are an agent, a builder. And every good builder works from a plan. But this plan isn't about perfection. It's about progress. You won't always live up to your values. You'll falter. You'll overreact. You'll regress. But if your identity is structured, you come back. You know what you're aiming at. You can recalibrate. The structured identity acts like a compass. It reorients you when you get lost. That's why it's so powerful. You also need to separate who you are from what happens to you. This is key. Many people tie their identity to their trauma, to their heartbreak, to the roles they've played, victim, caretaker, rescuer. But you are not your wounds. You are not your past. You are the conscious agent who chooses what those experiences will mean going forward. That's identity. And it requires courage, the courage to stop letting pain define you and start letting values define you. The final layer of structured identity is service. When your life is about more than just yourself, when you contribute to something beyond your own emotional needs, you develop a stronger sense of self. Service to a higher cause, to your family, to your work, to a spiritual principle. This is how the self becomes solid. Purpose tempers pain. Service contextualizes suffering. And from that, you derive strength. When you build a structured identity, emotional detachment is no longer about suppression or escape. It becomes a byproduct of clarity. You don't need to attach your worth to unstable relationships because you already know who you are. You don't need constant validation because you live in alignment with something real. You don't fall apart when others leave because your identity isn't rented, it's owned. And when you own who you are, you become dangerous in the best sense of the word. You become someone who can feel deeply without drowning, who can love without losing themselves, who can walk away when the situation demands it, not out of apathy, but out of principle. That is what it means to be emotionally free. And that is the gift of a structured identity, stability in the storm, strength in the silence, and sovereignty over your soul. Emotional detachment is not emotional repression. It's discipline. It's clarity. It's growing up. It's realizing that love without responsibility becomes slavery, that peace without boundaries is chaos, and that freedom without structure is meaningless. So if you're struggling to emotionally detach, don't ask, how can I stop feeling? Ask instead, how can I become someone who feels deeply and still stands firm? Because that's the mark of a fully developed human being. Thank you.